for me, and this is the beginning of the project, so I'm looking forward to lots of great. I'm going to be talking about the Hispanic immigrant and health advantage at older ages. So briefly, I'll go through my main question. Current research on legislation, I can probably go through fairly quickly. I'm sure most people are aware of that. And then talk about data methods and results. And then lots and lots of future ideas and lots of
Just hold on.
We can't hear.
Okay, so my main question today is there a health advantage for late-age immigrants in Latin America? So we talked a lot about health advantage for younger immigrants, I think mostly at working age, but what about seniors? So I'm going to focus today on health at arrival. Does self-reported health by age at arrival differ from that of the native-born, meaning U.S.-born Hispanic population? The next part I'm not going to get to in today's presentation, but I think is very important as well, in that once we quantify what the health status is, are there changes once they age here in the U.S., and then are there changes in their healthcare utilization? So, there's lots of evidence of the Hispanic immigrant health advantage. We usually see this in terms of the mortality rate, and that this group that on average has low SES has actually better birth outcomes. And so now we're seeing an increasing number of late age immigrants, and so we want to know, are we still going to see these same health advantages? And we know that the U.S. is facing an aging population, and we have minimal healthcare reform, so we have an increasing number of late age immigrants, which may also stress our healthcare system. I want to mention that there was a reform in 1996 called the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigration Responsibility Act. And one of the key things was that it specified that sponsors of immigrants must show that they earn more than 125% of the poverty line, where the poverty line was calculated as their family here in the U.S. as well as the immigrant that was coming. This is to kind of show that they have the financial capability to support their immigrant. However, I think most people would agree that 125% is not that much money. As far as Social Security, legal immigrants are eligible for Social Security. They have to be here in the States 5 years. The main issue is that it requires 10 years and 40 credits of work. So when you're thinking about late-age immigrants, and I'm talking 50 and up, potentially they could come and plan on working for 10 or 15 years, but will they actually reach the 10-year full-time work requirement that's needed? And I'm guessing that mostly not, and so they won't be eligible for Social Security. They will be eligible for Medicaid after 5 years of residency. So most of these hypotheses are probably pretty well known. I guess I just want to put this up here so that we can kind of think about them in terms of older age immigrants, and are they still relevant? We've talked about the healthy migrant effect, and it intuitively makes sense when you're thinking about working age population, but if you're talking about older age immigrants, possibly children are bringing over their sick parents, would you still expect to see a healthy migrant effect? The salmon bias is not an issue in my data because I'm looking at a cohort that's just arrived, so I don't have to worry about losing people that are returning home. We also need to think about the social cultural behaviors that we found to be protective, and will those still hold? There's also the possibility of measurement error. Ethnic identification or misidentification should not be an issue with my data because I'm not linking up vital statistics and mortality data. It's all self-identified. There is the possibility of age discrimination. So my data. I'm using the New Immigrant Survey. It covers new legal immigrants from May 2003 through November 2004. There's approximately 8,573 people, and it's about a 70% response rate, which is pretty good. The interviews are collected as soon as possible after becoming a lawful permanent resident. This is important because it really gets at health on arrival. The interviews have been conducted in the preferred language of the interviewee. And the 3 points that I want to highlight that really make this data set unique and useful, that I know age at arrival, so that I can look at the health status of a 50-year-old immigrant, which you might imagine is quite different than a 7-year-old immigrant. Country of origin, which we know is important. I will not be touching on this today. I'll be looking at, in general, Hispanic immigrants, but for the future to drill down, the country of origin will be really important. And then my last point is really what makes this data set great, is that I have the visa category that the immigrant's working on. So that you can imagine that a 60-year-old immigrant that's coming here to work might have a very different health status than a 60-year-old immigrant that's coming because they're being sponsored by their child. So that's really what makes this data set stand out and what I'm going to rely upon for my analysis. And I'll be matching this up with the NHIS, which I think most people know about. I've tried to match up the quarters to kind of get the dates right, matching with the NIS. And I'll be using ages 50 and up on Hispanics born in the US.
Well done.
So I'm looking at Hispanic immigrants, 50 and up. I'm looking at US born Hispanics, 50 and up. And my outcome variable is self-reported health. So I am taking a 5-category ordered variable and I'm turning it into a dichotomous variable, so it will be good health compared to bad health. I'm using a logistic regression, and I'm going to think about this in the latent variable format, in that there's some unobserved true health, and if that's greater than 0, then they will have a yi that's 1, that's a good health, whereas if their unobserved health is actually less than 0, then we'll observe them being in bad health. And then I'll include some demographic controls. So here is my variable of interest, and I created a variable with 6 categories. So the first category is if you're native born, meaning born in the US, so that would be all US Hispanics. And then the other categories are if you're here on a family visa and you're sponsored by your child, if you're here on a family visa and you're sponsored by a different relative, if you're here on a work visa, if you're here because you're been legalized. And then the third, partly due to frequencies, I've combined refugee, diversity, and other visa categories. And so the first model will be as simple, just looking at my variable of interest and age, but then I'll add in controls for education and income. When I've looked at the Hispanic immigrants, 50 and up compared to US born, the immigrants have much lower education and much lower income on average. And for the visa type variable, which is my key variable, the US will always be the reference category. So the native born will always be my reference category. Okay, so I'm going to jump right in and not show any coefficients because I find log odds not that intuitive and not that helpful to look at. So I'm going to think about these in predictive probabilities. So what I've done here is that I have calculated a predicted probability for the average person in my sample as if I could start them off as a US Hispanic and switch them to another category. So these are all differences in predicted probabilities of good health. So this model is just the first model that just has my variable of interest and age. And we see not much other than the visa category of work, where we do see that there is a difference between if you're coming as an immigrant on a work visa versus the health of a US Hispanic. So they have about 0.2 difference between having a predicted probability of good health. The rest of the categories are different signs, and the confidence intervals across 0, suggesting you can't really be sure that there's any difference between those visa categories and the health of US Hispanics. And now, next model, this is where I add in education. Now everything jumps to about 0. So this is for every category when you're looking at them compared to the health of a US born Hispanic, they all have a higher predicted probability of being in good health. And we still see that those that come on a work visa have the highest probability, but it's interesting that even when you're here on a family visa sponsored by either a child or another relative, we're still seeing these positive differences. So I think this is somewhat suggestive that there is still this health advantage even at older ages and even when you drill down into these different visa types. In the third model, now this is where I've added in income. So I'm controlling, it's still a pretty simple model, just controlling for age, income, and education, but we see that the differences have gotten even bigger and that all the confidence intervals are above 0. So there's all statistically significant differences between the health of people in these different visa categories and that of US-born Hispanics. So I think this is really interesting and suggestive of that this pattern is continuing, and definitely next steps are to drill down into country of origin, and this is also for the average person. So the average person is about 60 in my sample, and so to look at this across many ages will also be very interesting. So for the final slide, I'm just going to talk about some of the things I plan to do in the future. I just mentioned that drilling down by country of origin and looking at different ages for all these predicted probabilities. The second thing is that this NIS survey has a second wave, which is great. The problem is there's a lot of missing data, so I have to figure out how to deal with that data because there was a low response rate. But I would like to use the second wave to look at how they've aged in the US. Explore possible culture-specific interpretations of survey questions. So there is potentially an issue with questions that the translation between Spanish and English were not done well. And so that this might be sort of a data artifact that they're answering a different, that they're self-reporting their health differently. So I need to look at that. Part of what I would like to do after getting the second wave is that I want to look at healthcare utilization, because once you've been here for 5 years, which this cohort will have been, they will be eligible for Medicaid. So I want to look at doctor visits, insurance, all those aspects of healthcare utilization. And then also there's potential to add more demographic controls and make these more fully specified models, living situation, marital deception, emotional stability, probably many other things that I could add to these laws. But in conclusion, I think that there is still, we're still seeing this pattern, surprisingly, even for all different visa types, when you look at ages 50 and up for Hispanic immigrants compared to US-born immigrants.
The next page? Yes. Can I just make an announcement?
Sure.
They just wanted to make sure to announce that for the dinner tonight, there will be transportation from here to the restaurant. But they will tell us the details later, so you can make your plans. But also, I wanted to apologize because I didn't say at the beginning of this session that we are very proud in the tradition of the Conference on Aging of the Americas to have a session of what we call emerging scholars. And this is it. This is the session in which the graduate students have a place to present themselves, and we chose from the people that submitted abstracts these 4 presentations. So thank you very much. Thank you.
The next paper is by Philip Cantu, and it's got a new title. It's Lower Body Limitation, Measurement, and Active Life Expectancy in U.S. Populations over age 65.
Thank you, Roseanne. Yeah, I changed the title of my presentation after giving it in my lab group, and people thought that this was maybe more on point about what I'm actually doing today. So I'm co-authoring this with my advisor on health. And get right into it. Earlier today, Bob gave a presentation where he talked about some of his previous research on active life expectancy for Hispanics, and what's been found consistently is that Hispanics and Mexican Americans have longer lives, but those lives are plagued with longer extended periods of disability. But that's always come from these survey measurements where we're asking people, can you by yourself perform these ADL measurements, or asking survey questions about these NAGI items. And there's definitely predictive utility in using mobility measurements to look at disability. But there's a vein of research that has always questioned the validity of these self-rated health measurements for Hispanics, particularly looking at the question of self-rated health. But I think that that concept almost certainly extends to ADL disability. And so the classic disablement process is measured through functional limitations and disability. Our disability is always measured with these survey questions of our activities of daily living and the instrumental activities of daily living, both survey measurement items. And then functional limitations are measured by the NAGI functional limitation questions, and more recently, these performance-oriented mobility assessments. The advantage of these performance-oriented mobility assessments is that they are actually measured by researchers. You're rather asking, can you walk across the room? You have a researcher go and measure how long it takes you to walk across a room. And so from that, we've come up with this sort of idea of disability concordance. In this upper right-hand corner, we have what is good health. You have no self-assessment of disability, you have no ADLs, and you have no functional limitations, no POMAs. And that top right-hand corner, we have your POMAs-only disability. Those are individuals who only ask you by yourself, can you walk across the room, can you perform these battery of questions? They say, absolutely you can. But then when a researcher goes to measure their ability to walk across the room, to stand on their own or balance, they're not able to perform these tasks. Similarly, down here in this bottom right-hand corner, you have your ADL-only disability. Individuals who we ask, can you perform these activities? They say that they cannot. But then when we have a researcher go and see if they can perform these activities, if they're able to walk across the room, they're actually able to perform quite well. And then finally, in this bottom left-hand corner, we have this dual disability, and we're using both measurements. We find that you both say you're not able to perform these activities, and then when we measure, you're not able to. And so when we extend that into active life expectancy, we get these hypothetical distributions of healthy life expectancy using the dual measurements of disability, whereby when you use just POMAs, you have one particular healthy life expectancy. When you use just ADLs, you have one healthy life expectancy. And then there's three possibilities in overlap whenever you're using them simultaneously. There's the no overlap, that individuals who are reporting having POMAs only report having POMAs, and individuals who only report having ADLs only report ADLs. Really unrealistic hypothetical model. There's also the all overlap, and that is considering that there would be some sort of perfect accordance between POMAs and ADLs, that POMAs are an absolutely necessary component to having an ADL. And there would be no change in the active life expectancy between the POMAs and the all overlap group. A reasonable hypothetical situation. And then there is the more lenient some overlap, where some individuals will say they have the ADLs but not the POMAs, some individuals will have the POMAs but not ADLs, and there will be a large percentage in the middle where they overlap. And this leads to a situation where there could be some possible disagreement in the way that we're measuring active life expectancy across races, just because simply they may not all follow the same pattern. So my research question is then, how does this dual measurement of disability affect active life expectancy disparities between races? To look at this, I had to find a data set for whites, blacks, and Hispanics that contained both the POMAs and the ADL. Not the most easily acceptable. The NHETS has good information on elderly whites and blacks over age 65, drawn from the Medicaid population. Unfortunately, there's no mortality data there, so I had to borrow the mortality data from the NCHS life tables for 2008. Very, very few numbers of Hispanics in the National Health and Aging Trends Survey. So in order to look at Hispanics, I decided I would limit myself to looking particularly at Mexican Americans in the Southwest and use the HEPEASY data, wave 1 and 5, with mortality follow-up through December 31st, 2011. Anybody who's familiar with the HEPEASY will know that this number, 3,571, is not the entire sample. That is because there are a number of individuals who do not have the ADL measurement or do not have the POMAS measurement. And finally, instead of trying to look at an entire battery of ADL and POMAS questions, I look at the two most comparable, the lower body limitations. Are you by yourself, without the help of special equipment or anybody, able to walk across room as a survey question? We go and we ask you. And then the POMAS measurement, how long does it take an individual to walk across room? And I coded those who were unable to complete the task either because they attempted and were not able to, or didn't attempt because they felt unsafe as being POMAS disabled. Using multi-state life methodology here, what I'm doing is I'm estimating a underlying mortality schedule for each of the populations, and then I apply my predicted prevalence at each age to estimate disability life expectancy in the different stages. What I mean by the predicted prevalence is I'm talking about that 4 quadrants where we had earlier, where you have the ADL only disability, the POMAS only disability, the dual disability, and the healthy. I then simulate that 500 times to estimate the variance in life expectancy. Because I'm drawing from the NCHS life tables, I'm not actually estimating the variance in the life expectancy for the white and black populations, but I am estimating variance in the different disability states for them. So very quickly, these sample characteristics are just to give you a sense that I've got a fair number of disability in each one of my groups. I've got fairly significant sample sizes, and the combined disability indexes, it operates differently in the different populations. We've got fairly large healthy numbers in each one of the populations. The dual disability is much larger in either the native-born or foreign-born Mexican populations, and this ADL only disability is particularly a phenomenon only of the black and white populations. You see very, very limited numbers over here in the native-born and foreign-born Mexican Americans. Likewise, the native-born Mexican Americans and foreign-born Mexican Americans are exhibiting a lot more of that POMAS-only disability. And so this multi-state life table is maybe a bit to take on. Lots of numbers up here, and we see that the white population is different than all of our other populations. But let's focus in on a couple things. First is total life expectancy. These are life expectancies that I'm pulling from the NCHS. These are life expectancies that we're estimating using the HEPEASY. I was hoping that maybe one of our UTMB colleagues would have gone before me to talk about this, but these are very low life expectancies that we're pulling out of the HEPEASY. Strikingly low given all previous research, especially for the Hispanic women up there. I think this is something that's still going to need to be looked into, but I feel fairly confident that these numbers are reflecting the reality, and I think that these life expectancies are a conversation that we're really going to need to have as researchers using the HEPEASY. But a little bit easier numbers that are less of a shock are these healthy life expectancies, where we see that indeed Hispanic women have the lowest healthy life expectancy of these breakdowns. Likewise, men have the lowest healthy life expectancy. And I was having a conversation with Terrence yesterday, and he was talking to me about, is this sort of paradox of women living less healthy lives that dramatic? And when you look at this, really we're seeing the same number of healthy years in the Hispanic populations for foreign-born and native-born men, but the proportion is just so much lower. That 2/3 of their lives being lived in this healthy life expectancy, opposed to 3/4 of a life for the Hispanic men. I think this data really lends itself to looking at it more graphically, where we can see that this homeless-only disability is a significant part of the disability experience for each one of the populations, but really, really so for the foreign-born and native-born Mexican-American women and the foreign-born and native-born Mexican-American men. And so the question then for me is, why are they experiencing such high rates of physical limitation without stating their own disability? And what are the potential consequences of this extended period of physical limitation that isn't considered disability yet in their own mind? I think there's some significant limitations to this research that I'm doing right now. The borrowing of data from the life table for the black and white populations. It's been shown that in the NHIS that data is pretty close to this number, or to the life expectancies they had there. So I think that those life expectancies could be fairly spot on. I would really feel more comfortable if I could draw data, or the mortality data from the same source as my prevalence data. I'm using a prevalence model for disability, or for multi-state life tables here. I really think that a transition model might be more effective, especially given that people in different disability states are more or less likely to die over a given year compared to individuals in different disability states. And finally, I think that I really need to develop some sort of multi-stage disability model when talking about these ADLs, POMAs, and dual disability. I'm especially concerned that I think that disability is operating differently for Hispanics, especially in terms of this extended period of functional limitation. So, conclusions I'm drawing right now are that the burden of disability is currently being undercounted, but differentially so by race and gender. Mexican Americans are experiencing shorter lives with more disability than any other group over 65, and the proportional distribution of disability types is similar across races, while the proportion of overall disability differs. That's the healthy life expectancy being different, but the sort of ratio of POMAs only, ADL only, and dual disability being quite similar. Finally, I'd like to acknowledge the support I'm getting from the National Institute of Aging and National Institute of Minority Health and Health Disparities to conduct this research. Thank you so much.
The next paper is by Deshaun Choi, and it's how does legal status moderate the relationship among acculturation, neighborhood characteristics, and health of Hispanic adults.
Hi, my name is Deshaun Choi, and I will be presenting our working paper titled How the Legal Status Moderate the Relationship Among Acculturation, Neighborhood Characteristics, and Health of Hispanic Adults. Aggie is my co-author, and we met at ASA meeting, and I introduced me, and I said to her, I'm focused on the relationship between immigrant health, acculturation, assimilation, and neighborhood effects. And she says to me, oh, their relationship may be differ by legal status of Hispanics. So I say, okay, let's do research. That's how this research is created. Okay, so first, importance of adult health. Well, individuals' health in adulthood and middle life have important implications for their health when reaching older ages and undergoing health aging within the right course framework. implications of health in adulthood are not only lasting, but also cumulative. As you can see in that figure, health in adult life can result in different trajectories of health in older ages. So then can generate health disparities in elderly population. Thus, investigating social factors affecting health of Hispanic adults is very important for understanding the dynamics of health of Hispanic aging in the United States. So, what do you know about the health of Hispanic adults? Well, in this study, we focused on two factors: acculturation and neighborhood characteristics. Well, studies have consistently documented that these two factors plays a critical role in shaping the health of Hispanic adults. For the relationship between acculturation and Hispanic health, the evidence paints a little bit complex picture. Some studies have shown that greater acculturation predict worse health outcomes, such as increased risk of smoking, drinking, and infants' low birth weight for Hispanic population. But while other studies also suggest that acculturation may be associated with improved health service use and better access to health care resources, and thus resulting in better health outcomes for Hispanic populations. Also, many studies of neighborhood and their effects on the health and the well-being of Hispanic residents have shown that higher neighborhood SES immigrant concentration, which is usually measured by proportion of Hispanics in a specific area, and collective efficacy or trust or safety of neighborhood are associated with better health and access to health promoting resources. And acculturation and neighborhood characteristics are connected because Hispanic immigrants experience their assimilation process within that neighborhood. Then what is missing? Well, we focus on legal status of Hispanics. According to the CPS Current Population Survey 2011, 28% of foreign-born population in the United States are undocumented. And among them, almost 80% are from Latin American countries, and the majority of them are from Mexico. There are some studies reporting that legal status of Hispanics are related to their health outcomes, such as obesity and their health behaviors. So we think that maybe this legal status, this is maybe due to Hispanic integration into American society, and their interaction with neighborhood characteristics can be moderated by their legal status. That's how their legal status affects their health outcomes. For instance, undocumented Hispanics are less assimilated into American mainstream society than their documented counterparts because of the stronger structural barriers they face on a daily basis. Since greater acculturation means increased risk behaviors for the Hispanic population in the U.S., this level of acculturation may mean the health protecting effect. But in contrast, undocumented Hispanics are, in general, socioeconomically disadvantaged group, so they are more likely to take a downward assimilation process into Ontario culture, where usually poverty rates are high and health resources are lacked. So undocumented Hispanic can face more unfavorable health environments compared to their documented counterparts. And according to the Massey and Barkley, 2005, social, economic, and political incorporation experienced by immigrant population with different legal status is very different. So it is possible that the legal status of Hispanic adults can also increase or decrease the influence of neighborhood characteristics on their health outcomes. Despite the strength of the evidence reporting the significant association between acculturation, neighborhood characteristics, and health of foreign-born Hispanic adults. The social process underlying racial status differences in these associations is pretty understood. Therefore, in this study, we extend the previous literature by focusing on the role of racial status and aim to address the question, how do racial status moderate the relationship among acculturation, neighborhood characteristics, and health of Hispanic adults. We use two health outcomes to obtain more comprehensive understanding: self-reported health, SRH, and drinking behavior. As you know, self-reported health is a very strong predictor for morbidity and mortality, and we use drink behavior to tap health behavioral dimension. The data used in this study comes from the first wave of the Los Angeles Family and Neighborhood Study, NFS. This study aims to know how neighborhood affects a variety of outcomes, including individuals' health, stress, and health behaviors. As I noted, we use two dependent variables, self-reported health and drinking behavior, and we recorded both outcomes as a binary variable. For self-reported health, excellent, very good, and good self-reported health are defined 1 and 0 for health. For drinking, we categorized in this variable into two groups: high drinker and moderate or non-drinker. High drinker is defined as an average of three drinks per day in the last 30 days, which is coded 1, and for moderate or non-drinker is coded as a 0. Race and ethnicity, nativity, and racial status and acculturation are key independent variables in this study. Following previous work, we used length of residency as a proxy measure of acculturation. Foreign-born Hispanic who lived in the United States for less than 15 years were coded as 0 for lower level of acculturation, and those who lived for 15 or longer were coded as 1, indicating a high level of acculturation. For neighborhood characteristics, we focused on perceived collective efficacy, which is defined as a form of social organization which captures social cohesion and trust. This variable is constructed based on 7 research questions about perceived trust and safety of the neighborhood they live in. We expect that higher perceived collective efficacy can offset negative effects of neighborhood characteristics on undocumented Hispanic experience. Well, this is a working paper, so we only use perceived collective efficacy, but we will add SES of neighborhood and the proportion of Hispanic immigrants for neighborhood characteristics, but these variables are in restricted data set, so we are working on it. And age, sex, education, household income, insurance, and employment are used as an independent variable as well. So how do we measure racial status? In the LFS, there are 3 questions about the foreign-born population's racial status. So first question is whether US-born or naturalized citizen. If not, they ask about their permanent residence or green card. If respondent says no, and they ask, are you a refugee or actually temporarily protected status, or how's your visa? So if foreign-born Hispanic says no for 3 questions, we define them as an undocumented status. And we follow these categories from other study. And our sample is adults, age 20 plus, and sample size is almost 2,600. And we categorize our sample group into US-born non-Hispanic whites, US-born Hispanics, foreign-born Hispanics. But later in the model, we compare the health outcomes between non-Hispanic white, foreign-born Hispanics to capture the effect of nativity. Then we stratify foreign-born Hispanics into their legal status. And then we stratify this model by acculturation level. And then we included the interaction term between collective efficacy and legal status to see whether the collective efficacy moderate, the legal status moderate the effect of collective efficacy. And since we have a 15% of missing variable, missing information for income, so we used multiple integrated imputation procedure. Well, findings for self-reported health. First, no difference. We found no significant difference between non-Hispanic white and foreign-born Hispanics for self-reported health. So think about, given that lower SES for foreign-born Hispanics, this is consistent with Hispanic paradox. And there's a little differences in SRH by foreign-born Hispanics legal status. And when we stratify this model by acculturation, among documented Hispanics, only higher acculturation group shows worse self-reported health than non-Hispanic white. But for undocumented Hispanics, both acculturated groups, higher acculturation, lower acculturation, two groups exhibit worse self-reported health than non-Hispanic white. And we found no interaction effect of perceived collective efficacy and legal status for self-reported health. Turning to drinking, consistent with Hispanic paradox, foreign-born Hispanics are less likely to be heavy drinkers than non-Hispanic white. But still, there is a little differences between legal status groups. But for documented group, both high acculturation and lower acculturation groups show lower risk of being heavy drinker compared to non-Hispanic white. But only lower acculturation group among undocumented Hispanic show disadvantage. And similar to previous research, previous finding, we do not find no interaction. We do not find interaction effect between legal status and perceived collective efficacy. Well, over the findings suggest a weak effect of legal status on health outcomes, and also weak moderate effect for neighborhood efficacy. This is maybe because the Los Angeles County is a majority county where Hispanics are ethnic majority. As you can see in this map, the yellow dots on the right picture means 20 people for 20 Hispanics. So we can see high segregation and concentration of Hispanic population. So we assume that we think that maybe this maybe due to this there are well-established network and resources the undocumented foreign-born Hispanics can access easily regardless of their legal status. That's why there's a real effect of legal status. And the finding also suggests that health decline for Hispanic over time, or as they portray in terms of drinking behavior, is faster for undocumented Hispanics than their documented counterparts, which supports the idea that undocumented Hispanics may face more acculturative stress and assimilate into the underculture, where unhealthy behaviors are prevalent. Okay, so this is a primary outcome. We are working on it. And as you can see, we found our weak effect of legal status. And we think that this is because of a high proportion of Hispanics in Los Angeles County. So in the future, we will compare the strengths of association between areas with different Hispanic, proportion of Hispanic populations. So then we can see why the mechanisms of this weak legal status. Thank you.
Thank you, Desmond. The final paper is by Lawrence Panes And a new title is Determining the Reciprocal and Temporal Relationship Between Depression and Disability in Older Hispanics.
Thank you, Raven. So, as we age, the risk of disability increases because as we get older, our bodies start to decline and these things can differ between different populations. We've had quite a good introduction to this topic this morning thanks to Bob and to Philip. So what we're interested in is looking at how this relationship exists in daily life. So we know that for Spanish-speaking Hispanics, there seems to be this relationship or of a greater risk in later life. So that could be immigrants and stuff like that. But we also know that depression increases in older life due to life stresses such as disability. So this indicates that there's a relationship between these two factors. And so this has really been of interest to a lot of researchers through time. And this association has been found in the general public overall, older populations, and the Hispanic population. So we found this, at least a suggestion of an association between all these groups. This research has also suggested that earlier depression may influence your later disability, and that your disability may influence your later depression. So there's this kind of reciprocal link between the two. But this really hasn't been studied all that much. In 2002 is probably one of the earliest papers from Ormel that I found where they really tried to look into the reciprocal relationship between these conditions. And some of the findings so far have shown that disability has a stronger influence on higher depressive symptoms than higher depressive symptoms will on disability. So therefore, if you're more depressed, more disabled, but if you're more disabled, or more disabled, more depressed, but if you have higher depressive symptoms, that shouldn't necessarily mean that you'd be more disabled. A lot of the research that has looked at depression and disability in Hispanics has really focused on cross-sectional and longitudinal studies, mostly looking, if you look at longitudinal, a lot of these are SEM studies, or longitudinal without accounting for. So suggestions are there that there's this relationship, but it's not really been examined in detail, and that's kind of the point of it. Most studies examining the reciprocal relationship depend on SEM again, so it's more of a correlational analysis, which is good. This is very important. It really helps feed a lot of our research, but through a lot of time, we always have to sit on this, well, we know there's a correlation, but what does that really mean? So we attempt here to kind of create a novel approach to determine the concurrent association of disability and depressive symptoms through time. And we use the Hispanic EPIs because we don't expect that as they disable that they should be terribly different from other populations, so we can evaluate them and also compare this to other methods that would give us similar results, so SEM and other things like that. If I hit the button right, it'll just hold it. So based on previous literature, we'd expect a strong association of disability and depression, but a weaker association the other way around. Your past depressive symptoms should increase your risk of current disability and current depression. Now this depends on your study. Some studies have shown that if you go from a two-wave study looking at longitudinal relationships, that your previous disability kind of has a lag effect on later disability. Current depression or past depression, current relationship to current disability, and vice versa, that your past disability is related to your current depressive symptoms. And then, of course, your past depression should influence your current depression with people with a history of depressive symptoms. Usually that continues on and grows through later life, increasing your risk. And disability, if you're disabled in the past, your risk increases. And time should increase both depression and disability, so disability again as you age. And depression, because depression is kind of this U-shaped curve where younger people are more highly depressed because life transition and puberty and all these hormones. And in older life, again, you have life stresses, a lot of transitions, a lot of changes are going on in older life as your friends die, different business, work transitions, and so on. So a lot of risk of disability and depression in older ages. So we used the Hispanic EPIs for this study. Of course, the first wave is 3,050 subjects, age 65 plus. They're all non-institutionalized to kind of give you a background of who we're looking at. And for our study, we looked at those people who were enrolled to 2004, so with the disability and the depression symptoms. So right now it's just a working paper. So hopefully what we want to do is get more information and maybe a full information model to try and give us the most analysis power possible. And that covers about 8 years of data. So our response variables are disability, no ADL versus any ADL. And our depressive symptoms are those lower than 16 or equal to 16, and those with high depressive symptoms, so 16 or higher than 16. And those people are who you would classify as clinically depressed when you compare it to other scales of depression. Covariates assessed at baseline, age groups 65 to 70, 70 to 75 and 75 plus, gender, nativity, education, less than 6 years or greater than 6 years because of low education in Hispanics, older Hispanics, married, and living alone. Now, for this, again, working paper, this is all we use right now, which is baseline covariates. We don't have our covariates change through time, so that's something to consider for now, that eventually we need to work in our covariates shifting through time, especially for married and living alone. Even 4 years, there can be a lot of transition in those two things, or 4 waves. So our preliminary model is a longitudinal transition model with simultaneous modeling. It models your current ADL and your current high depressive symptoms, and this is through NL Mixed and SAS. And this uses that program, and then Naiwei, who's our biostatistician, had to manually put an equation in between the two to link the two together. Explain correlation between your past and present values by allowing your past values to influence your present. So your past ADLs can influence your current ADLs, your past ADLs can influence your current depression, so they can model, I'll show that here in a second. And it allows your current current values to influence one another right now. And again, baseline covariates. So you see there, ADL, ADL, depressive, depressive, ADL to depressive, depressive to depressive, and then the two, what you're looking at currently. Model 1, Model 2. Now the way the models are done, in Model 1, the depressive symptoms is listed as a covariate in Model 1, and so that's why you have to estimate them at the same time. You have to do these two equations together, because they feed each other. And this is Model 2, where you take ADL status and you put it in place of depressive symptoms, and depressive symptoms is now your X. So baseline characteristics for age, about 40, 30, 30, more females than male, about 2/3 of the sample is female. US born is about 60-40. Education was about 30%, or 30% was greater than 6 years, but most 70% were under. Marital status, 60-40, and living alone. Most people live with somebody else at 80% and 20%. So preliminary results, these are your two current associations. So your current depressive and your current ADL, if you look at them, they both have similar odds. So your odds here are about 3 times higher risk for those people with no current depressive symptoms. So people with high depressive symptoms have 3 times the odds of needing help with an ADL than those people currently reporting no high depressive symptoms. And alternatively, for ADLs, someone who reports a high ADL right now, so at wave 8, had 3.3 times the odds of reporting high depressive symptoms than those people who don't currently report an ADL. And so that's what those two are. So we see that past ADL and past depressive symptoms are associated with their current manifestations, which is what we hope. Now, for the other two, past depressive symptoms and current depressive symptoms, or past ADL and current depressive symptoms, we're not finding an association. Now, this can go back to that relationship that I was mentioning, where you see after 2 waves or so, your past lag effect seems to disappear. And so we don't know yet. We need to do more exploration on it, but that could be what's feeding into this. And so there's the two where we don't see that cross relationship. So our conclusions, our models does show a link between current ADL and current depressive symptoms and with the past conditions, reports of these conditions, the related conditions. But it does not show the reciprocal link between the past values and current reports of the condition. So past ADL is not associated with current depression. So measurement may play some part in this as well. CESD asked how often you felt a certain way in the past week, versus ADL asked if you can do any activity without help, which is a very current and present representation. But again, that could just be a measurement thing for time, but we need to do some more assessment. It does seem to be a value so far, but we'll see. So strengths, it does follow for 8 years, so 4 waves. The relationship between disability and depressive symptoms across in the time can be tested here, and it accounts for transitions between and among states. Now, some of the future work, identification. Since this uses simultaneous equation modeling, we've not really, this is very preliminary, we've not really worked in identification yet. So there's a lot of latent factors that we really need to sit down and go through the literature and really hit on and decide what's important, because these equations can become unwieldy, especially when you're trying to decide what's really important to fill in this background information that you really need. There's also a survivor effect right now, because we only looked at those people who had enough information to make it to that last wave. So we're hoping to go back and use a full information model to kind of fill in some of this background and really give us some more oomph. Your transition and covariates, it does not account for the changes, especially if you're marital status and living alone right now, your living arrangement. And comparison of methods. So we know SEM, I know in a walking and disability paper that they looked at GEE, so general equation estimation equation, to do something similar. So we could test different models to see, are we showing something unique and useful by doing this? So the co-authors, Naiwei Chen is a biostatistician, Dr. Martinez, who's helped with data and support on this project. Dr. Kristen Peak has helped with design. She did some previous work on SEM models, looking at disability and disablement. And Dr. John Froska is helping me with the content. And Dr. Rebecca Wong for her help and her comments, and to Dr. Dan Juker, who also provided comments. Now, before we go into that, Naiwei is not here. He's really been the statistical powerhouse here. So I will help where I can, and I will address what I can. But if you have any questions, please let me know. My email is there, and it's also on the list that you're provided, and I will give them to Naiwei. He's really hopeful that he can improve this and make it into something successful. Thank you very much.
So as you can see, a very interesting set of papers by our set of emerging scholars. And if we can have the presenters come up here to the front, and we'll start the question and answer session. Questions or comments? Bob?
Yes, it was a great presentation. I want to ask a question about the last presentation. So 8 years, and you took, what, 4 waves, approximately every other year. So lots happening in the lives of these people. And so do you think one of the reasons why you're not getting these cross effects is simply because you're just not following people on a week-to-week or month-to-month basis or something like that? I mean, take many things about it. But 2 years, so you get these correlations in the cross-section. So can you comment on that a little bit?
So again, like I said from the literature, we see after 1 or 2 waves that really your past effect of anything seems to fade out. And I think part of it is the time effect and part of it is the effect. I don't know if when we can look into it for kind of latent constructs, if we can fill these in and try and establish them, but I do think it's just, that's why I wasn't too surprised to find is that you do have all these things going in over each time. So what does that mean?
So I guess I just want to follow up and say that at least in my mind, that the correlation in the cross sections are really quite interesting. I mean, you can't really say anything in a formal sense about causality there, but I think that's really suggestive of that these things may be influencing one another, and you don't have the measurement to pick it up. So one thing to think about. I don't think there's anything in the world statistically you can do about it.
Right. I mean, and that's absolutely the case. That's why, I mean, we chose 4 waves for this first one because it's the very preliminary concept. What we're hoping to do is probably restrict it down to maybe 3 waves in the future and then compare, because the EPIs is refreshed at wave 5. We're hoping to compare a younger group and an older group and maybe see if that changes even if for some reason one works. So, yeah, we're thinking about all of that, right?
Exactly what you were saying, that there is, that you said that there is nothing statistical that can be done. There is. It's quite advanced. It's quite complicated. It's called continuous time models. It takes into account that for longitudinal models can only have certain length, and there is always something going to happen in between those time. So it uses some. There are different methods to account for that. And I was going to give you actually a suggestion using one of those. Particularly the one is called the exact discrete model. That can be, I think, can be useful for that kind of thing.
I have a question for Philip. When you look at POMAs and you look at ADLs and IADLs, even though they're both talking about functionality,
Right.
they're conceptually quite different.
Right.
And you've done a great job of trying to look at overlaps and trying to look at how those interact and affect men and women differently, which I think is great. And a couple of thoughts I'm thinking here. So one thing is, and we have that issue, it's hard, but it's been reported. Even though the self-report of ADLs and IADLs is an issue, the training of people to do the POMAs is also an issue. So when you talk to Jack Koralnik, and he did a beautiful video trying to train people on how to do the POMAs. One of his thoughts is it's very hard to train people to do it correctly. And you see a lot of variation in the clinical setting when you're trying to, but that could potentially be explaining part of the difference that you're seeing is that people might not be measuring what they think they're measuring. And so that's an issue that you need to keep in mind because those large differences could be not measuring things that could explain those differences. And the other thing is, even though I think it's important to know when we're measuring when we're trying to see how functional an older is, you might want to look into the conceptual things behind ADLs, IADLs, and POMAs, and maybe analyze them separately and see how different the results are before trying to see how much overlap there is. I don't know if that's clear. Maybe get one step back and trying to see that before you do this, because that could tell you a lot of why the difference or the overlaps that you're seeing and how they might or might not be important.
Right, I definitely appreciate that, and I think what I'm trying to establish here is that the POMAs are almost a necessary component to the ADL question, to this question of can you walk across the room, and this measurement is almost 100% of the time there. Now, it's a necessary but not sufficient for the reports of these ADL disabilities. Where I'd like to extend this line of research is there any possibility that there's something in the Mexican-American community that is allowing them to have these POMAs disabilities and not report their ADL disabilities? And is there any possibility that in the future these POMAs disabilities or these ADL disabilities are going to expand so that there's a larger period of this dual disability measurement? That basically the current measurement of ADL is undercounting what is the actual disability burden of the Mexican American community. based on the physical component of it.
Language of interview and how people are understanding the questions could be an issue. There are people here from the UTMB group that have done that before, so you might want to touch base with them because that could be part of it. Unless you're not, they don't have to. So they have to understand the question, but it's more of the measure to get the time right, correct?
Right.
While if it's the ADLs or the IADLs, they might not be understanding exactly what you're asking, and that could be make fun tricks there.
Jason, enjoyed your presentation. It was interesting to look at part of it. You examined drinking, and you found some modest effects, but not huge effects. But you measured it in part with high drinking, so 3 drinks or more per day, versus everybody else.
Yeah, moderate, non-drink.
Yeah, did you try and divide it up and look at it differently? That oftentimes for drinkers, the beneficial effects are really light drinking, so it would be 1 drink per day on average. And moderate could have higher risk, and abstainers or former drinkers could be different. So if you could divide it into former drinkers, light, moderate, heavy, and abstainers, you might get a little bit more information. But I think there you're going to get bigger play for foreign-born immigrant status.
Okay, thank you. It's very good advice. So actually, I passed these categories, and well, honestly, we just followed previous literature of, when we categorize this variable for green. But yeah, I will do that. About these categories.
Yeah, it'd be worth investigating.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you. Great presentations, thanks a lot. I have a question for Alicia. So I was wondering, I'm not very familiar with the New Immigrant Survey, the details of the questions, but I was very glad to see that you used it. So you reported evidence of the healthy immigrant effect. And I was wondering, when you get a green card, is there variance there about the time in the U.S.? How long they've been here before they get the green card, and can you explore that to kind of get more variance of those who are here?
Right, so part of the category of legalization, a lot of people have been here for a while, so I can look at that and see how long they've been here. And then also I want to explore, we know immigration is a flow, and so there's a lot of questions about have you been before, where did you study, did you study here, how's your English, so it's all those things to kind of get at, have they assimilated already, even though they've only just come into immigrants. So there is, some possibility for later, more likely. Yeah.
Same for Alicia. I would suggest that when you mentioned some of the strengths of the data and your analysis, I would definitely add that you not only have HR arrival, but you have a more exact measurement of HR arrival than pretty much any survey that national representative anywhere in the U.S. You of course have only documented migrants, but at the same time you can also measure given that people have been, the 2003 cohort had different experiences and so on. You can also measure prior undocumented experience, so you could divide them that way as well, or consider, what amount of the undocumented experience, tagging on to Rebecca's point, what amount of their experience is undocumented, and see how that relates to health. I just had a question about when you compared. Did I read correctly that you compared to U.S.-born individuals? And that I missed that because I was also I'm trying to take notes, which I guess are not very good. Because I missed where those data come from.
So that came from the NHIS data, and I could have, we have that data includes foreign-born and U.S.-born. So I restricted it down to U.S.-born to try to make it a somewhat cleaner comparison.
And finally, when you looked at the work, the visa type differences, did you control by national origin there?
Not yet.
Okay, because they might be confounding. It might be that the work-related visas for older individuals, especially come from a particular set of countries where those differences might not be related to the motivation for migration per se, least not those reflected through the visa selection process, but through other issues related to context of immigration and so on.
Other questions or comments?
Can I just follow up with one? So I'm really curious about who the work-related visas, who they are. I mean, what are they doing? So we know a lot about work-related immigrants at younger ages, but these are all 50 and above, right?
Right.
And the confidence bars doesn't seem to be crazy. So it seems like to me that you have a pretty sizable group there. I'm just curious, who are they? Where are they from? What are they doing? Because they're healthy, or healthier than the other groups and U.S. born. So I think just understanding that composition would be really, really useful.
Yeah, I definitely have more work to do to understand who they are from specific countries. I did do a quick kind of check of ages. The work visa category are mainly 50 to 65, but there is still variation. It's not like it's everyone that's 50. And the other categories kind of contained equal numbers of people in the same ages. So it wasn't just that you're seeing the younger versus older.
Steve?
So, quick comment for Alicia. You mentioned being interested in people when they become eligible for Medicaid after 5 years, but about half of the states qualify immigrants the day they arrive through state-only Medicaid. So California, New York being the large ones. So I don't know if your data set has state ID of the state that they're living in, but that would be that's almost a natural experiment. People who are settling in states where they have Medicaid availability to start with versus those who don't. And then, Philip, you sort of threw a stink bomb out and nobody responded to it, which is, why does Hispanic Appeasee folks have lower life expectancies? Right, we started today with this very sophisticated, very nicely done presentation showing that Hispanics, immigrants, have both Hispanics and Hispanic immigrants have longer life expectancies, and then the Appeasee is showing shorter than whites. So what's up?
Right, and it's especially troubling given that some people are working on, or actually, one series is working on life tables for the Southwest and finding that Hispanics do have longer life expectancies there. So what is it particularly about the Appeasee that is giving us these lower life expectancies? I would say that it's a very particular group of Mexican Americans that we're looking at in the Southwest, being generally lower educated, poor, and I'm guessing that's why it is, but I don't know. And so that's something that I'm trying to work on, is look at where do these differences in life expectancy over 65 really happen between the NHIS and the Appeasee numbers. Because I think that we can look at the mortality schedule that we get from estimating the different mortality curves for these two different populations, the NHIS population, and we can see where the difference is. But I don't have an answer as to why, and I would hope that somebody in this room.
Well, we're working on that.
Thank you.
Actually, we're doing a really good job of documenting mortality. I'm just kidding. But I think LJ and Carl and others in our group are working on this, and hopefully we'll have some information.
Right.
It may be this cohort we're talking about. These are old people, very old. Right. We started in '93, people 65 and older. And now, if we go back next year, we hope to really be 85 and older. The life expectancies that the official life tables for 2006 might be, are using information on more recent cohorts.
Right. So not only are those official life tables supposed to be period life tables,
right,
to reflect the mortality schedule of everyone at the year 2006. This is definitely a cohort of individuals from over 65 and older at 93. So they're not necessarily going to be living out the same mortality schedules as 2006.
Yeah.
But that said, it's still a question that really does need to be dealt with. Why are we getting such low life expectancies out of this? Is it something particularly about them being less healthy? Is it something about the national life tables being off? Or are we just looking at different populations with different life expectancies, or are there errors happening somewhere?
Well, their disability rates are high. Yes, everybody's showing high disability, no matter what level you look at. And then, people talk about the Alex paradox. Why are these supposedly so disabled people living longer based on life tables? And it raises questions. I mean, to sick people live longer if they're Mexican. It's...
And you're following people to Mexico who pass away as well, right? So are you capturing more deaths?
We have very few that
pass away in Mexico.
Documented that they left. I mean, Casio can talk about the, salmon bias. It's a minor issue, right?
Correct me if I'm wrong, but the people who are capturing the Mestizi who are dying abroad, those are all proxy reports. Those are not NDI matches. Anybody who moves back to Mexico who's captured in our mortality data. We're relying on proxies for them, not the NDI matches.
Definitely, yeah. We don't think it's very many.
I have some good news, and Elizabeth Arias from the National Center for Health Statistics, who came out with original estimates in 2010 of active life expectancy for the Latino population, will be early 2015, has specific estimates for the Mexican origin population. So perhaps we can reconcile some of these differences next year.
But the cohort period difference is non-trivial if you believe, right, that there's these temporal distortions, which sound weird for a temporal measure such as life expectancy, but that there might be these cohort peculiarities that are not being captured by this independent cohort, or because of our heterogeneity. Supposedly, when life expectancy is increasing, then in period measures you'll see basically a higher increase than you would have otherwise seen if you believe Bongart's infinity, which I think I do. So maybe an adjustment of that sort. I don't know if Dave Thayers or Michelle Guillot, or I don't know. You know those things better than I do, but might be worth exploring to see if those differences are major, and in any way to make it a more fair comparison, just by the fact that you're using cohort data versus period measurements of mortality.
Right.
So I don't know if you would have any other cohort you could use, cohort studies for whites that you could use instead.
So there is and there isn't. There are the other EPI's data sets. The problem is that I don't know if anybody here has had any luck of getting a hold of the sort of better versions of that data. So there's the public use, and then there is the proprietary use data, where they have the actual ages. The public use, you have the 5-year age groups, but you can't drill down into how old they are.
There's no published estimates of rates, for instance, you could just plug in.
There could be. It's one possibility to explore.
Any other questions or comments?
Just one comment.
Yeah.
Yes, just to this question, this discussion about cohort and period measures. When I was invited to come, I thought about asking Bert Kastenbaum, who provided me data for my dissertation in 2004. Provide me data for like 30 years of Social Security data to compare cohorts and period and so on. In my dissertation, I compared the mortality rates by cohort, age and period of Hispanics, foreign millennials born, and the percentage is persistent across cohorts and across time. So this is 65 years. So I asked him to update that matrix until 2010, but I wasn't able yet. So I think that would be useful to see the cohorts versus the period measures, but the Hispanic advantage is still there.
Right. So given that it persists in different cohort measurements, different period measurements, we come back to why are we getting the numbers that we're getting out of it.
So have you done the basic comparison of how the EPI survivors compare to the AHIS survivors of the same age?
That's sort of the next step. And going to look at mortality at particular ages and see where the age difference really lies.
Sorry to monopolize, but Desmond's paper was very interesting, and he was posting that you didn't find any differences for undocumented versus documented. But although some of the duration differences between people in different durations of stay, at least in those two big groups, might be telling because of the lack of alteration with the undocumented. Meaning, anyway, there are a few interpretations for that, I think, but it will depend on how you look at the durations in more fine-grained manner. And I'll be curious to see if you find, say, the neighborhood effects, although there's a paper by Rachel Kimbrough and Maureen Goldman and a couple of other people, I forget who else, but that use that kind of setting, so it would be interesting to compare. But just, which reminds me, and I think Edna Burrell would agree given that she's written on this, but we need to move a little bit beyond the, trying to differentiate between acculturation per se measures, acculturated behavior and that kind of process from, the more of a cumulative disadvantage kind of thing that Rob mentioned in the morning, I think, in some ways, which relates to, not some of these worsening of Hispanic health takes place related to structural conditions, not necessarily to just basically acculturating, basically Americanizing our diets and so on. Anyway, but it will be interesting to look at that from both optics when you do your analysis using the unrestricted data. Okay.
And finally, any comments on each other's papers?
Actually, I have a small thought also about the Asian migration, Asian arrival. Maybe that means it has an implication for the degree of selectivity, not just ranks of residence. So, for example, if you came to the United States at very young ages, you're more likely to come here following your parents. So in these cases, your the health migrant effect is weaker. But for those who came to the United States at older ages or adulthood, at me, have a very greater chance of the limit of the health migrant effects, because if they're not healthy, they cannot come to the United States alone. But this maybe so. This is more thought. Asian migration maybe has an implication for the different degree of selectivity.
If you could join me in giving them a round of applause.